I look at it as an economist, which is my job. Of course, he would have political and other things and communicating with the public. But the three basic parts of this of sustained, fast, inclusive growth and development to become Viksit, to become developed. So the three parts, important parts are the sustaining fast growth. So there issues like reforms were emphasized, past reforms and assurances of continuing reforms, the public goods infrastructure, again lots of examples of what has happened and what will be done, will continue to be done. The second part is the empowerment, and in some way there's two parts to it. One is Antodaya, I call it, the poorest of the poor, but the basic approach, as the finance minister said, is to move from entitlement to empowerment. So there are of course basic needs which have to be met, but the idea is to strengthen the base so they have the capabilities to earn and develop on their own. And of course this is to cover every citizen of this country in every geography. So empowering the whole population, different groups, every group. And the third part is what I call, which may not be very clear, but which I think is equally important, that the viewpoint is for both these is holistic and pragmatic at the same time. And I'll just give you one example, is the green economy. There are a lot of people, different solutions, arguments about climate change, etc. The approach will be, and it's a very complicated issue. So have a overall holistic approach and do all elements, because it's not clear that there's only one way to get there. Be pragmatic about it. That is what I would say is the overall approach. And some of the things, words she used was reform, perform, transform, and the emphasis on technology, FDI, etc.
Right. So, reform, perform, transform, Vikasit Bharat. Dr. Virmani, being an economist, you're pretty much, echoing what the finance minister also said in her budget speech today, which again seemed more like a reiteration of the Modi guarantees as opposed to a real statement of accounts and a real statement of expenditures going forward. So, how do you react to that, sir?
So, the budget with a globalized economy, the audience is not just the domestic audience. What I am trying to emphasize to you is for the international audience. So, I have not mentioned a whole list of schemes, etc. But, the emphasis very clearly on development, Viksit Bharat, I think is also a message to the international community, because this is a golden opportunity, and the emphasis on sabka prayas, that we must all get together and participate in this national effort. So for example, when there's talk of youth, he's also inviting the youth to look for new opportunities. There will, of course, he puts it in, there will be a lot of new opportunities. That is the aim. Obviously, we have to see how that happens. But the idea is to tell them, don't just think in conventional terms, be open to other opportunities. There's entrepreneurship and other things. So you can say, the politicians will focus on the part you just asked me, but as an economist, I focus on the inclusive growth part of it.
Okay, Dr. Virmani, since you were mentioning you're talking to a global audience, and I think the geopolitical, geo-economic scenario is not something that we can ignore given the situation the world is in right now. So to your mind, what are going to be the real drivers of economic growth? Do you think we can export ourselves to growth? Do you think there is domestic consumption which is going to be the key driver, or the government's capex and the investments that the government is making in infrastructure? What will drive India to a developed economy by 2047 in your opinion?
That's a very good question. Let me start with what's in the budget and what has been in the budgets, and then I'll go to the broader issue. So it's very clear that the government has emphasized capital expenditures, and this is firmly grounded in economics. So what is the economics of it? First is that the quality of budget, when people talk about, they always think of the share of capital in a thing. The second thing is that investment is what drives growth ultimately. And the third is what is called, drawing in, I forget the word right now, the complementary private investment. And studies have actually shown that the expenditure multiplier for capital expenditures is 2.45. So we have proof that this has actually helped in getting growth rate of over 7% in the last 2 years. I basically say the over percent is fully due to this. So that is one part of it. The second part, your broader question, there are several elements. I'll just mention a couple of them and then again you can pursue. So one of the key ones which is now very clear in the mind of GOI is that there is a big opportunity for getting manufacturing supply chains into the country. So this is both the global environment, the domestic changes we have made in reforms, etc. And now it's very clear. You know, I just joined the government 14 months ago, but I have been talking about supply chains for like 3 to 5 years. And earlier it was not fully clear whether his government is completely. Now I'm convinced that government is fully on board. They are going to grab this opportunity because it's the large opportunity for manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing, labor-intensive exports. The second part I'll just mention again, that there are going to be many new opportunities in services, and the source of this is the demographics of the world. You know, the share of working age population in the developed countries, in most of our potential competitors in the East, including Vietnam, Thailand, etc., is going down. The only country where it's going up, and China of course dramatically going down, and the only place where it's going up is India. And there will be many opportunities for a wider array of services. So it's all these. I mean, the simple slogan again I can give you, which is skill for India and skill for the world. So that is definitely a part of the government's policies.
Okay, we will come to manufacturing subsequently, but since you had mentioned infrastructure and the capital expense of the government, so talking about the capex, Dr. Virmani, there has been an increase by about 11% for infrastructure development, from about 10 lakh crore rupees to in excess of 11 lakh crore rupees. Now, can we expect in the full budget, when it is likely to to come through in the month of July this year, that the focus of this delta on capex is likely to be on green infrastructure?
See, the growth in expenditure cannot continue at 30% forever. So what I had said even before the budget was that it will stabilize. And as you just quoted, and the minister said that it is now 3.5% or so of the 3.4% of GDP. That's a very good substantive level. And the issue was only whether it will be maintained, and the minister has assured that this is going to be maintained in future. So that is enough in my view. So for what? So again, a lot has been done on building highways, in building railways, in building metros, in building airports, ports, etc. The downtime in ports has gone down dramatically over the last 10-15 years. So what the budget is indicating is that we are going to extend this and make sure that every part of the country is covered. That's how I would read the intention for the future. So if there are gaps in the railways, there's announcement of various corridors to make the time taken for logistics even quicker. There will be the connection between ports and others, the multimodal transport, etc. So think of it as extending the infrastructure to every part of the country and removing bottlenecks. You know, one of the things one learns in growth theory is that even if you think you've done all the reforms, new problems arise when growth actually speeds up because of your reform. So that is how I would read the government signal, that as new problems arise, we are going to address them.
Right. So since you're talking about reforms and the speed of reforms and the multiplier effect that reforms, especially in infrastructure, will have on the larger economy, Dr. Virmani, I also want to understand from you, since you were specifically talking about manufacturing and PLI previously, do you think the full budget in July is likely to overhaul PLI which hasn't seen the kind of uptick that was expected, even though the economy review suggests that some 7 lakh jobs have been created and investment to the tune of over 1 lakh crore rupees has come in. But how much of that has gone by way of PLI, we don't know as yet, out of the total outlay of 1.97 lakh crore rupees. The budget speech today was silent on that as well. So do you think in July we can expect some sort of an overhauling of PLI?
So, very good question. Let me take a few minutes. You've taken a few minutes. When the PLI was initially introduced, it was designed to close the scale gap with China.
Right.
Okay. And I'll tell you why and where that is obviously applicable and where it may not be. Okay. So, very simply, the economics tells you that the average cost is a curve which goes down and flattens out. So, that curve where it turns is called minimum efficient scale, and our scale was lower than that, while China is way out there. So, what we needed to do is get to the minimum efficient scale. So, the incentive PLI was designed to give the incentive to companies which are below the scale to get up to the scale, so they can compete at least on scale with the Chinese companies. So, that is the original intent. Now, it turns out that you have to look at every industry and see how far this is applicable, and clearly in the electronic industry, in ADP what we call, in telecom, this is certainly applicable. There are other complicated goods like capital goods, etc., where it's applicable. Now, for others, one has to see carefully whether there is a problem of scale or not, and restrict this type of PLI to those industries. Now, the attempt has been to modify the PLI and apply it to a lot of different industries. I think perhaps that has already been reviewed, and I think there would be corrections. I mean, that is the approach which should be, that you go along and you correct the policies as you go along, and I expect that to happen.
Right. So, corrections I think is something that industry is also expecting, and investors looking at participating in India's manufacturing story are also hoping for. But I want to shift your focus now, Dr. Virmani, if you'll allow me, to the green energy transition, and that is something that we were hoping that in the budget speech some very robust announcements are likely to be made. Unfortunately, barring just touching upon gasification of coal, biogas and the rooftop solar panels which are going to offset the electricity bill on households that install the same, overall the budget on all previous budgets as well as this budget hasn't really seen the kind of robustness which is required to put India on track for both 2030 for meeting our renewable energy targets and the 2070 net carbon zero mission. Now, I think at some point we were lucky that our oil prices, thanks to the Russia-Ukraine war, a blessing in disguise, we were able to keep our oil prices and the import bill in the narrow lane. But, that was a surprise, and that is not something that is likely to sustain. So, for this overall net carbon zero green energy mission, are we on track, sir?
Okay, another very good question. So, you mentioned oil. So, that is one of the areas which I worry about. I have for 30 years, since well before I was CA 20 years ago. So, the solar is very important from our perspective, relative to most other countries, because we are so heavily dependent on oil, and it's not just a matter of availability, but at the cost of oil. When the cost of oil goes to 80, 90, 100, 120, that is a big negative for us, because it's kind of like a tax on all Indian consumers in a way. I mean, whether you shift the budget or you give less or more incentives, etc., it's just an internal balancing. That money is gone. So the solar part of it is very important for us, and I would see this incentive which is announced is a way of getting people involved in thinking about these issues. So there is, we know for the last 5-7 years that solar production has been the cheapest of it. Whenever there is a auction, it's all done through, I mean, the private sector says we'll do it through solar. So right. On the margin, the solar is the most efficient right now. Okay. And it's just a matter of promoting it, and what the government is doing is giving a further signal to the public that this is important. The right. second part of it, there are 2 or 3 other issues. The other part is that bio is our thing, We have a lot of animals, we have a lot of agriculture, so getting into the biogas, etc., in a modern technologically sound way is very, very important. So that was the second part of it. And the third is the toughest. I'll tell you why. I don't know how much time you have, but you know, you cannot increase the share of solar beyond a certain point unless the storage becomes cheaper, because you know, right? So that is that's the tough part. We are thinking about it different ways. I wouldn't assert that the full answer we have, but that's where I said holistic and pragmatic approach is there. And certainly you will see more steps in the future.
Sure. I think as long as that intent is there and as long as the intention is there, the answers will be found. But I know you're on a short time window with us here, Dr. Virmani, but I can't let you go. You being a renowned economist, I think there is one question I've got to ask you. As an economist, what does it make you feel like when you hear new definitions for acronyms that are used in regular economic parlance with a new definition that the finance minister has given today? I'm talking about GDP and FDI. How does that make you feel as an economist when you hear new definitions?
You know, I always feel a little, I don't know how to put it, you know, some of these, words, you know, professionals or experts may laugh at, but they are very important communication device to the public people. You know, it doesn't behoove us economists to just show with our slogans and professional terms. I think it's an important thing which we cannot do, I cannot do, but it's important. PM is a master at it. He is able to translate these complicated things into something that would resonate with the people. So in that sense, I welcome it.
Right, Dr. Virmani, always a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time on a very busy day, and I'm sure you would have had many other TV interviews also lined up, but thank you for speaking to News9 Live. Well, I also have now with me my colleague Shweta Kothari joining me. Shweta, you heard what Dr. Virmani was saying. I want to understand from you, what was your first reaction when you heard a new definition of GDP and a new definition of FDI? That's something I want to ask Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal also. But I mean, how does that make you feel for a student of economics and somebody who tracks the economy? A brand new definition.
You know, the first thing that it brings me to is the fact that this government has very innovative acronyms for everything.
Right.
And it appears like finance minister is actually following Prime Minister's path when it comes to using these acronyms in a very rather effective way, because these words, they leave back some impression in people's mind, and these bags are, these acronyms can easily be recalled. So there's a recall value to it, and then there is a new definition that is proposed by the government. So essentially trying to ensure that every person, whenever they talk about FDI, as opposed to talking about foreign direct investment, they're talking about first developing India. So I think the fact that these are commonly used parlances in economics, these are parlances that many people use to talk about India's growth story and whether India is doing well or not doing too well, because we heard Shashi Tharoor saying that although there was a new definition to FDI, Finance Minister never talked about how much FDI has been coming
and circumvented the dip in FDI.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the dip in FDI was never touched on. So I believe it's an interesting opportunity for a government to come up with new words, new acronyms, new parlances that can be easily used in a daily language amongst people in the media, which is what is making us, you and I, talk about it
Absolutely.
today.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to take a very short break right here on News9 Live. On the other side of the break, we will have member Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council economist Sanjeev Sanyal joining us. So don't go anywhere, and if you do come back in just a minute or so. Thanks for watching.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
Currently, the industry is facing a lot of challenges as far as demand is concerned. Basically, the US markets has slowed down because of high inflation.
So obviously, diamonds being a dream product, something which doesn't have a utility value or is seen as a luxury. So that obviously goes off your shopping list. That's the first item that will go off your shopping list, especially in recessionary trends.
That lab-grown diamonds are not mined, and they do away with the entire mining. So they save up on all the environmental damage that is associated with mining, and of course, the mining cost, which is why they're even more affordable.
People that is impacted by all these recessions are the artisans, are the people who work in this industry, right? But I think lab-grown diamond has allowed them to actually use their skills in the same product.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
A defiant performance by Ten Hag's men. Now standing at 7 feet 4 inches, Satnam Singh is making his way into professional wrestling.
We are getting more good news for India.
वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा.
There is certainly a wall of capital coming into the clean tech, climate tech space, not just in India but across the world.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
20,000 people dead and counting. What's happening in the United States of America is unprecedented. You will have to pay for this.
Welcome back. You are watching a rolling coverage where we are trying to decode Budget 2024 and draw out with experts the roadmap for India to become a developed economy by 2047 and the immediate target of being a $7 trillion economy by 2030. Joining us now, as told to you earlier, is none other than Sanjeev Sanyal, economist, historian and a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. It's a busy day for you, and I'm sure it has been a very, very fruitful day that you would have had listening to the Finance Minister's speech and all the questions that I'm sure you would have answered already. But please indulge me in asking you some more questions. And I think the first one really is that this time around, the hope was, while the expectation was that there may not be big bang reforms, but a very clear roadmap to the $7 trillion economy, at least, if not to a developed economy by 2047, would be laid out by Finance Minister. But somehow it seemed that it was more of a political manifesto. It seemed like a repetition of Modi's guarantees as opposed to a real economic roadmap.
Well, you have to be clear what this is. This is an interim budget. It's a vote on account. It is primarily a fiscal exercise. And and the Honorable Finance Minister delivered a very short speech signaling the following thing, that this is a government that takes macroeconomic stability seriously. We don't believe this is not a government that believes in providing political sops ahead of an election. So there are no populist freebies that were announced. So the signal is, we believe in stability and in fiscal conservatism. The fiscal deficit is expected to fall from 5.8% to 5.1%. And there are no changes in the taxes. That is basically the first and most important signal that was being being given out. Also signaling that there'll be continuity of various things, one being the spending on infrastructure, which has been clearly again telegraphed ahead. This is something this government believes in doing, and so there is a further ramp up of capex in infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And finally, the support for the very poor, whether it's in terms of providing Awas Yojana or extension of the health insurance scheme and other things. So signaling again a continuation of a direct support for the very poor through providing safety nets and so on. So the idea here is not to lay out a grand plan for till 2047. The idea is this is an interim budget, and we, through this process, will signal the key sort of things that this government believes in.
Right.
And when in July it comes back, they will come up with a more clear measures for the next cycle.
All right. So, I want to run some numbers past you, and you being the economist, we would love to get some guidance right here live on the show. If India is to become a $7 trillion economy by 2030, given that in FY23 we closed at a base of about $3.5 trillion, this year we know we are expected to grow at 7.3%. Next year, the data which has come in right now, the estimate suggests that we are looking at a 7% growth. Even if India were to be able to sustain the 7% growth year on year from FY25 onwards to FY30, the simple compound interest formula dishes out a number much lower than $7 trillion. In fact, it rests at about $5.5 trillion or so. As opposed to, if I can just lay the hypothesis here, sir. So, if we were to believe that that India will become a $5 trillion economy by FY28, for which the 7% growth is adding up beautifully, then we are looking at growing for the balance 2 years at a significantly high 19% growth rate. Rather, on the other hand, if India were to target a double-digit growth of, let's say, 7.37% this year and next year, followed by an 11-11-12-12-12 cycle, then we are hitting the $7 trillion mark. Is that a fundamental problem with the calculation, or do you think this double-digit growth is achievable?
No, your calculations are incorrect. So let me explain.
Sure.
You have to understand that when you're talking about the number that you just used of 7% growth and so on, these are fixed price, constant prices in a particular from a particular year. So whatever the base year is, these are real, what is called real or constant price GDP growth rates.
Right.
The target that you are mentioning is a nominal target at current prices, not at fixed prices. So what you have to add in back here is inflation.
Inflation.
So yes, so when you say, let's say you have 7% GDP growth and let's say 4% inflation, so you are actually compounding at 11%.
All right.
And then you have to, of course, because it's done in dollars, you have to then have some estimate of what you think the exchange rate will be.
Right.
Now, the exchange rate is broadly stable now. So let's, I mean, it may, whatever you think is a depreciating rate or appreciation, you can work it out. But let's say it's stable, then you are compounding at least, even if you have 7% GDP growth rate and 4% inflation, then at least at 11% every year.
All right.
And that is how those calculations are arrived at. So be very careful just using the constant price GDP growth rate.
Fair enough. And what do you think, in your estimation, is actually going to be better for India in the long term? The rupee appreciating or the rupee depreciating? Because the depreciating rupee is great for exports, but an appreciating rupee is going to keep our import bills high. So what do you think India should really gun for going forward when it comes to exchange rates?
So we have a very well-established system which the Reserve Bank has been now running for some time, and it is basically what we do is we lean against the wind. So supposing there's a lot of pressure for the rupee to depreciate, then we use up our foreign exchange reserves. We have quite a lot of it, about $620 billion of it.
That's right.
And then when it's under pressure to appreciate, we accumulate reserves.
Okay.
So basically what we do is we allow the rupee to find its own level, but don't allow huge volatility. I think it's a good approach to take because it allows the rupee to find its true value, but at the same time it doesn't allow the rupee to sort of go up or down too much, because that is disruptive.
All right.
So I think that is what we will continue doing. Now, what is happening, however, that over time the rupee is becoming a much more credible currency. We have anchored our inflation. Our exports, our share of world exports is growing, although the world economy is not growing very fast right now, but nevertheless our share of it is rising, and we are also taking various measures in order to harden the Indian currency as well, and allowing it to be used widely and so on. all of this means that over time, I expect that the pace with which the rupee has depreciated, the pace over time, I think that will slow and maybe the rupee will become a reasonably stable currency vis-a-vis the US dollar.
Okay.
So that's where I think it will be. But that is not because we are doing anything actively.
Okay.
It's just that that is where the natural price of the rupee will kind of stabilize.
Right. Before my colleague Shweta Kothari jumps in, I have one more question for you, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, and that is about the fiscal deficit. And the fiscal deficit, even though it has been reduced marginally in this financial year, expected to close at 5.8%, and the next financial year is likely to be 5.1, followed by 4.5, we still seem to be a fairly large distance away, long distance away from the 3%, which needs to be the long-term target of the economy. There hasn't been any mention of how India can reach that 3% milestone, and it still seems fairly elusive. So, do we have the kind of debt financing instruments, and are we good to leverage ourselves to reach that 3%? And until we reach that 3%, are we good financially?
We are more than comfortable on that front. As I said, 5.8% is what the finance minister announced is the deficit we will have in this financial year.
That's right.
My own calculations, by the way, suggest that we'll do better than that, but that based on the data up to December. But never mind. Let's take the finance minister's number at 5.8, and then it comes down to 5.1, and then finally 4.5. This is a very responsible pace of consolidation. There is absolutely no reason to do it any faster because our borrowing is under no pressure at all. The borrowing number that has been announced, I think the bond markets will be quite happy with it. And in fact, if anything, our cost of borrowing will decline over time as we consolidate. There's more than adequate appetite for these bonds in the financial system, our own financial system, and now increasingly global investors are also beginning to invest into it. In fact, as we become part of the global bond indices, more and more people buy them. So I think financing ourselves is not an issue at all.
All right, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Shweta Kothari this side. So, my question to you, is a continuation to what my colleague asked, and that is with regard to the fiscal consolidation part. Now, the borrowing figure has come down to about 28% as it was announced in the budget. However, debt to GDP ratio, as has been reported in many newspapers, also in an IMF report that was published early last year, is about 57%. Our own estimate is that it should come down to about 40%. Do you agree with those numbers? Number one. Number two, what is the path ahead to reduce that that debt burden on Indian economy?
So as I said, the debt to GDP ratio is declining. I mean, obviously it spiked up during COVID for obvious reasons. But since then it has been declining. If you look at our peers around the world, other economies around the world, you'll see they are far more indebted. And given that their economies are not growing anywhere as fast as our economy is growing, they have much bigger problems in terms of debt sustainability. India's debt sustainability is not a serious issue. Our debt to GDP ratio is declining because we are borrowing at a much lower nominal interest rate than our nominal GDP growth rate. So, and that interest rate is in fact over time likely to reduce. So the gap between our nominal growth rate, which I explained earlier, is real GDP growth plus inflation. So it's running at about 11-12%. So that is much higher than our borrowing cost, which is running around 7% and will probably decline towards 6% over time. So that gap is more than adequate to bring down our debt to GDP ratio, especially if our primary deficit is also declining at the same time.
All right. And one of the biggest announcements, of course, that was made was with respect to the capital expenditure, CAPEX, which will now be to the point of 11 lakh crore rupees, up about 11% from last year's allocation. My question to you is that, so in the last 1 year, we've had discussions about how government spending is on the rise, while private sector does not seem to be participating as much. What sort of momentum have we seen from the private sector, and when can we see that double engine finally being fired up with public spending on one side and perhaps private sector also spending on the rare side?
So this government has had a commitment to infrastructure spending for some time. So this is not new. And all that was announced is a continuation of that since it's when. So, I mean, what the Honorable Finance Minister is signaling is that, look, we are committed to better, bigger infrastructure, and this government has already built quite a lot of it, and we will continue building more of it. In fact, it's all visible to you. In fact, the world's largest concentration of cranes in the world is perhaps right now in Mumbai. So, this is visible infrastructure, and we will build more of it. So that's basically the signal. Now, as far as what was the question now?
So the question was about private sector participating.
Participation
private investments.
Private investments. First of all, this emphasis on public infrastructure and investment is not some substitute for private investment. It is not. We never see it as a Keynesian sort of pumping of demand, which is trying to sort of compensate for private investment. We are unapologetically a supply-side driven economy, and we believe in building this infrastructure irrespective of what the private sector is doing. Now, having said that, the private sector did go through, investment did go through a prolonged drought, but that has now more than come to an end. I don't know why this is still a part of the debate. Corporate India is in rude health. Our banks are in rude health. Many of them are raising money in the capital markets, and virtually any company you talk to now has expansion plans. Many of them are already implementing those expansion plans. So I am not sure why this discussion on private sector not investing. I mean, they are investing quite clearly.
Okay, I want to draw your attention now to the tax collection and the tax buoyancy. Till last year, we were seeing that the direct taxes and indirect taxes together were contributing about 15% each. In the new estimates presented by Finance Minister today, we are looking at tax buoyancy to go up to about 18% and 19% each. What do you think is going to lead to greater tax collection, especially on the back of already record high GST collections that we've seen, and the fact that rural demand continues to be tepid and job losses, even though government data states otherwise, but CMIE report suggests that the rate of unemployment in rural India is a little higher than what it is in urban India. So there is of course some data mismatch, but that notwithstanding, how does the government go after greater tax buoyancy to a point where both direct and indirect continue to contribute that much higher?
So I'll ignore the CMI data. I mean, I have long argued that it is a poor reflection of anything. I mean, even when the numbers dramatically improve, I don't use it. So it's not that I have a problem with it just because right now it shows something. I don't use it under any circumstance. What we can see is that clearly tax collections are buoyant. What is that a reflection of? Well, the obvious thing is that demand for products must be strong. Otherwise, how would you have GST collections being buoyant if people were not buying things? So I actually do not subscribe to this view that demand is slowing down, particularly in rural areas. I think demand is
But sir,
reasonably
how do we reconcile the data? Even if we were to ignore the CMI data, how do we reconcile the fact that out of the 7.8 crore Indians who have filed income taxes, a big chunk of that continues to be nil tax returns, so which pretty much states that their present income which they are drawing per annum is not even enough to fall in the tax slab. So is there no need for reconciliation of data?
So in fact, this is a problem of tax compliance, which we have had for a very long time. So one of the reasons the tax collections on the direct side is improving, the GST is different, but on the direct side, you are seeing improved collections is because of increased compliance. There is no doubt about that. And this compliance problem has to be, over time be solved. But the fact that more and more people are coming in and at least registering themselves is a good sign. As the numbers that you have put on, the filings have at least gone up dramatically, and in fact even those who are giving declared and even paying taxes is going up in numbers. It is a low number, it should be higher, but it used to be even lower in the past. So while we would like to do better, what you're seeing is a dramatic improvement on what things used to be.
Okay. Since we are on the matter of jobs, Mr. Sanyal, I want to pick your brains on how far we have come when it comes to manufacturing. The PLI in the 14 sectors that was opened up for to the tune of 1.97 lakh crore rupees has only shown investments to the tune of about 1 lakh crore rupees. Now, is that money enough? Number one. Number two, do you see manufacturing actually picking up in most sectors? Because we have only seen electronics, smartphones, IT hardware, and to some extent auto companies actually enjoying those PLI benefits. Are you also looking at other sectors participating?
So the way the PLI scheme was set up was to encourage dramatic scaling up of certain sectors that we wanted to target. Now, it was understood right in the beginning that not every one of them would work, but that is okay in some ways because the PLI is set up as an ex post support. So for whatever reason, if a PLI scheme does not work, the government hasn't actually spent any money on it because, so in that sense, if a PLI scheme doesn't work, you tweak it to see if it works. If even after that it doesn't work, you can put it aside and try another sector that you want. Because the important thing here is that if a PLI is not working, the government is not spending. So it is not like the government has ended up using up its resources to support something and it didn't work. You try a bunch, some work, some don't. And as you yourself mentioned, it is clearly working in electronic type things, probably also a bit in pharmaceuticals and a couple of other places. But there are areas where they have not been successful. Those areas may need other ways of supporting them. But meanwhile, the government has not tied up its resources in those sectors.
All right, that's all we have time for. Sanjeev Sanyal, as always, sir, thank you so much for joining us right here on News9 Live. Pleasure talking to you, and we hope to keep having you back with us, Shweta. Thank you
very much, Mr. Sanyal.
It's been a long day for you and me, so I think this is the opportune time to say goodbye. And thank you so much for watching. But before we go, I think we'll leave you with some highlights from that interim budget speech presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. But from us, it's thank you for watching and goodbye.
Honorable Speaker, sir, over the last 10 years, the direct tax collections have more than trebled and the return filers swelled 2.4 times. I would like to assure the taxpayers that their contributions have been used wisely for the development of the country and welfare of its people. I appreciate the taxpayers for their continued support. The government has reduced and rationalized tax rates. Under the new tax scheme, there is now no tax liability for taxpayers with income up to 7 lakh rupees, up from 2.2 lakh rupees in the financial year 2013-14. The threshold for presumptive taxation for retail businesses was increased from 2 crores to 3 crores. Similarly, the threshold for professionals eligible for presumptive taxation was increased from 50 lakh rupees to 75 lakh rupees. Also, corporate tax rate was decreased from 30% to 22% for existing domestic companies and to 15% for certain new manufacturing companies. Honorable Speaker, sir, in the last 5 years, the exemplary track record of governance, development and performance, effective delivery and Jan Kalyan has given the government trust, confidence and blessings of the people to realize whatever it takes. The goal of Vikasit Bharat with good intentions, true dedication and hard work in the coming years and decades. With this, Honorable Speaker, I commend the interim budget to this august House. Exemplary track record of governance, development and performance, effective delivery and Jan Kalyan has given the government trust, confidence and blessings of the people to realize whatever it takes, the goal of Vikasit Bharat with good intentions, true dedication and hard work in the coming years and decades. With this, Honorable Speaker, I commend the interim budget to this August House. PM Awas Yojana Gramin. Despite the challenges due to COVID, implementation of PM Awas Yojana Gramin continued, and we are close to achieving the target of 3 crore houses. 2 crore more houses will be taken up in the next 5 years to meet the requirement arising from increase in the number of families. PM Awas Yojana Gramin. Despite the challenges due to COVID, implementation of PM Awas Yojana Gramin continued, and we are close to achieving the target of 3 crore houses.